So thank you all for coming. My name is Sean Gummery. I'm the SVP of Experience Strategy and Service Design here at Cantina, and we couldn't be more delighted to kick off the first event of the Boston chapter after the launch of Continuum. We're super happy to have you here. We've got a great panel of folks to introduce in a few minutes. Just a couple quick words for those of you who may not be familiar with Cantina. So Cantina has been around for about 12 years. And we think of ourselves as a strategic design and technology company. So we do everything from software engineering and development to building connected IoT products to doing service design for innovation centers and how to engage the public and what that looks like. So we run the gamut of what we think of as strategy, design, and development. We welcome all you here tonight. And with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Gillespie to talk about SDN.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Gillespie. I'm on the leadership team for the Service Design Network and also one of the founders of this local chapter. This is our second official event, so we're very excited to work with the team here on that. There'll be a few more coming up this year that I'm going to tell you about in a moment. I've got a few things just to tell you about the Service Design Network. One thing that Sean and the team wanted me to find out from the group who are here is a general sense of where you're all coming from. So I'm going to ask, just for show of hands and stuff, who's from an agency consultancy? So about half. Who's from the public sector? Local government? No one. Who is a student? One, all right. Who's a professor? One. Who is in an in-house design team? About a quarter. Who didn't put up their hand? Where are you from? Management consultant, okay. But that's a consultancy, so. Yeah, okay. Right. All right, well, good. So the few things I wanted to share, one is that there is a brand new issue of the Service Design Network magazine, or journal. It's called Touchpoint. And the issue is entitled Managing Service Design. And I'm happy about it because it was a topic that I proposed to the team. And basically what it looks at is how service design and design management can help each other expand both the capabilities of service designers within companies as well as push the agenda for service design generally. And I looked at I was supposed to get copies today, or before this. I don't have any. I have some from 2014 that I found at home. So people can have those. I've got 8 or 9 of them that I will hand out. Timely, isn't it? It's very timely. So I can read this. I'll pull down my glasses. But there are a few articles in it that are kind of relevant to the theme here today. One is, it's called You Got a Problem. But it's essentially a piece about designing for better client-agency relationships. And it's a program that this woman, her workshop, put together called Solution Mapping that helps co-create strategies for dealing with potential problems during a project in advance. So that's kind of cool. There's another one entitled Managing a Long-Term Service Design Project, which is very relevant to this topic here because, a lot of agency consultancy projects tend to be kind of short. We got 12 weeks, we got 16 weeks, and then we hand it off and we're gone. So one of the topics that may come up tonight is how do we extend that relationship? How do we develop longer-term relationships with our clients such that we're there not just for the design, but also for the delivery? Another one is called Leadership Qualities That Foster Awesome Creative Teams. Another one that I think would be quite relevant to this topic. But there are a few also good ones on tools. There's one called the Living Service Blueprint, which is about embedding service design into agile projects. So for the engineers here and design teams on agile teams, that's a pretty good one. And then there's one called the Service Design Maturity Model, which is a framework to embed service design into an organization. So the folks here who are in-house and considering developing service design practices in-house, that's a pretty good one. And then there's another one where actually Ruben Ocampo from the Chicago chapter talks about bringing feasibility and viability, which is the old IDEO framework, to life in service blueprints. So you kind of have to be a member to get this, but you can buy it. However, there are a lot of the older issues that are now available for free, and you can actually go to medium.com/touchpoint, where a lot of the older issues are available, including this old one here on the table that I'm going to give out now in a few minutes. Oh, excellent. Look at that. Almost everyone will be able to walk out of here with an old copy of Touchpoint. So, anyway, what else am I going to say? Yeah, this is all. I'll be finished in a second. May 31st and June 1st is something called Service Design Day. It was a marketing program developed by the Service Design Network to promote service design around the world. And what it does is it just tries and asks people who are practicing it, interested in it, to promote it in a variety of ways. And I'm not going to tell you all those ways, but I am going to tell you that on the Service Design Network website, which is service-design-network.org, there is a PDF that tells you how you might participate and support Service Design Day. This year, if you were going all out, you might actually do a global, you might do a service jam, for instance, for, because the theme is really about using your service design skills for the greater good. But there's no public sector folks here, so we've all got to step in. And then a couple of dates. There is another chapter event coming up fairly quickly, and the Eventbrite may have gone out today, and it'll actually go out to our mailing list tomorrow. It's going to be at Mass Art, so it's more academic oriented. The theme is actually going to be, so Ben Little, who's one of my chapter colleagues, who was not here, thanks, entitled, "What Does the Future Student Journey Look Like with Regards to Service Design?" So it's going to be a panel with some professors from a variety of schools around the area who will be moderated by another partner in crime, John Campbell, who was not here either. Thank you, John. There's limited seats, I think. Maybe like 40 people will be able to attend that, but it should be pretty good because there's also going to be a couple of student projects shared. In fact, one of them, where does this say? I want to read this again. I think their project was how might we set up life on Mars? So I'm not sure what the service design connection is to applying service design to the human colonization of Mars. So if that doesn't attract you to go to that, I don't know what would. There's another big event coming up. The global conference is the SDN Global Conference is the big gathering every year. Over 800 people are typically attending now. The next one is nearby. It's in Toronto. So it's the 10th and 11th of October, and then the 9th is Members' Day. If you go to the website, you might get sticker shock because it says $1,100. But it's Canadian dollars, so it's only $800 US. So you're getting a discount by paying in US dollars, so think of it that way. Finally, one of the things that I've been working on forever, it seems, because we have a horrible web agency working for the Service Design Network, is building out a new case study experience. I did like some research a couple of years ago with the membership, and one of the things that everybody said, seemed like everybody said, was that, when I asked, like, why are you a member? Well, because I want to learn from the experience of others. And so how do you learn from the experience of others? Well, typically case studies. And so I looked at the case study experience, and it was a pretty diabolical experience in that to submit a case study, you had to go to this horrible form and try and figure out how to submit your words, your images, your media. And at the end of it, you couldn't preview anything you did. You pushed a button and you hoped for the best. It disappeared into the back of SDN admin. Someone had to sort of like look at it and possibly edit it through this horrible interface. Anyway, that's all gone. And that's only part of the horror. We now have, we're working on a consistent template, a consistent structure that, so every case study you can see a trend. We are also sort of putting in keywords which it never had before, better ways to organize it. So for instance, professional context. A lot of people said, well, I want to learn from others, but I want to learn from others who are in-house, or I want to learn from others who are in agencies. So you'll be able to filter that. And so, yeah, it should launch, fingers crossed, if Remco from this Dutch web agency can finally get his act together. will launch in the next month or so. So that's really all I had to say. So that's the latest news from the Service Design Network. As I said, you don't have to be a member. There's lots as a community member that you can benefit from. The main reason to become a member, honestly, is get a discount to go to the conference. And I highly recommend going to the conference if you can at all. It is great fun and really will give you a burst of energy for all of your design initiatives. So with that, I will hand the mic to Krista, who is going to moderate this panel of amazing folks. We're going to talk to you about optimizing design partnerships and other things too.
Did you want to talk about?
I think this was just my only supporting visual.
All right. That's our panel. Well, thank everybody for coming tonight. My name is Krista Siniscarco. I'm the Director of Experience Strategy and Research here at Cantina. We have a lovely panel for you tonight. I'll let them mostly introduce themselves, but we are looking at optimizing delivery and implementation of service design through different lenses, with different perspectives. So we have Molly representing the client perspective, Sean as the external consultancy, and Susan is actually both client and internal team, which is very unique. So would you like to introduce yourselves before we jump in?
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Mazzaferro. Is my mic on? Yeah? Okay, great. And I am a Director of Innovation at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. I've been at Blue Cross for almost 9 years now, and I was joking with someone during the networking that I never thought I would say that I'd be at a health insurer for this long, but it's been a great place for me, and it's afforded me some really unique opportunities, including most recently building an innovation team from scratch, an innovation practice, and now launching a brand new innovation center in partnership with Cantina and working on service design and consumer experience with them. So that's me.
That's your relationship to service design business?
Yes.
How about now? Yes. There we go. Technology. I'm Sean Gummery, and I had the service design and experience strategy practice here at Cantina. You asked me my relationship to service design, and it's a long and winding road, so I'll try to make this short. I first got exposed to the word in 2003 from someone I hired at Simmons College where I worked at the time, and I thought it was a really weird word. But I was happy to get early exposure to it, and those conversations led me to realize that for many years, going back to the early 90s, when I first was a practicing designer, that I was doing some strange form of service design insofar as I was working as a designer. I was leading a team inside of Simmons College at the time, and I was teaching part-time. So I was seeing students, I was designing touch points, I was thinking about policies and systems and internal training. And so it was a lot of front stage, backstage, the actual experiences that matter. We're getting echoes.
Sound twice as good.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. So long way of saying that I was doing some version of this, and I think a lot of service designers find themselves realizing at a certain point that they do service design but didn't have the label, and that was definitely me. So that's my short version. I've been working as a consultant and a designer for about 25 years and have a lot of different experience in terms of how I arrived at this point today.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Rice. I lead up the product design and research team at Toast. Toast is a late stage startup, much larger than you probably think of when you think of a startup. Right here in the Fenway area, focused on restaurant software, so really empowering our restaurant customers. So it's B2B SaaS software with B2C and B2B2C features. So I, like Krista had mentioned, I am building an in-house capability for service design. And to just kind of kick that off, we have a rec open right now, but to kick that off, we're also engaging in a service design engagement which actually just kicked off literally Tuesday. So super exciting, and we're really looking forward to improving, the customer journey across some key areas right now for us, and continuing that throughout, our Toast experience. So.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but and we do have Q&A at the end, but we don't want to necessarily wait to the end. So along the way, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. We'll get you the mic. But to kick things off, we want to talk a little bit about the difference with products and services. So for Molly and Susan, from more of an internal perspective, we do talk a lot about the difference of designing and implementing products versus services. Can you talk a little bit about what that difference has been within your own organizations?
So I was thinking about this question that Krista had kindly sent out in advance a little bit, and it struck me that this last 6 months has really been my first experience with formal service design, and yet we consider ourselves, Blue Cross, a service industry. We don't typically produce a lot of physical products like many other product design organizations do. And so I think, we've been on a journey as an organization to try to be more consumer friendly, and I think healthcare is incredibly complex and we have a long road ahead of us to get there. But being able to understand the application of service design and how, making sure that you're designing for your user and really putting them first and foremost in everything that you do has been an incredible learning experience for me, and something that I hope we can continue to build on as we move forward as an organization.
Yeah, so I didn't look at those questions as well as I probably should have, but so what I would say is there's actually a lot of overlap, quite a bit of overlap actually. However, I think it's one of the biggest differences that I can think about between product design and service design is the sheer amount of stakeholders that are involved that you have to get the buy-in for. Because what we're talking about now is no longer just a simple Scrum team, or if you want to talk about squads and tribes and whatever you want to say, or even just the R&D organization at large, right? Now we're talking about, the customer success team who has, 5 different roles and also sales, and we're talking about, the president of the company, and, go-to-market marketing, so we're talking about the amount of scale that you have to really be able to kind of build those relationships, get the buy-in that what you're doing isn't going to impede on the progress and the KPIs that they already have set forth, right? And in fact, you're actually saying, no, actually, this is we're doing this together, and actually will only enhance what you're already planning from an OKR perspective or KPIs, like all those things. So, so I would say it's, for at least in my experience, it's been much more about stakeholder management. And that buy-in stuff that you wouldn't typically, at least in my experience, again, have to get so much in an R&D organization.
So for Susan and Sean, I know that you're at different stages of service design within your organization. Susan, you said you're very new. Sean, about 2.5 years now at Cantina. Both Cantina and Toast were traditionally more product-focused organizations. So how are you changing that mindset internally? How are you introducing service design to the teams and the organizations? What does internal dialogue and education look like?
Sure, I'll start that. So I should say that this is new for me for Toast. So first, FYI, I've been here for about 8 months. So just to give you a little context. But previous, I was working at Mindbody and led the UX team there, and built the team pretty significantly in that company. And we were doing service design work, although we were calling it customer experience strategy work. There are reasons why I shifted my nomenclature, because that can get a hot topic right there, just calling it customer experience. So in any case, I took a lot of those learnings and brought those to Toast. And one of the things I was telling these guys, as we're just quickly prepping is, so when I joined the company, it was basically September, it was August 27th. And by October, I actually had to create a budget for us for 2019. UX had not previously had a budget. So, there were some things I had to consider there. So I had to make some really big bets a month in. And so this was one of those bets. I really felt like based on what I understand in 1 month in terms of the opportunities to really move the needle in terms of company, where the company could be headed, service design was one of those capabilities that we really needed to invest in. But in order to put a big six-digit line item into a budget that never existed previously, and by the way, that was not the only six-digit line item I added, I had to have a lot of conversations quickly. And the big fortunate thing is that I have a really big advocate in the executive leadership team, which is our president and one of the co-founders. So Toast has 3 co-founders, and they each take a different arm in the business, and really are really well balanced that way. So I really had to work with him to help. He already had an affinity to design, but help him understand the impact that we could make as a design organization with the right investments. And then not only him, because now I'm talking about a whole other team that I would most likely impact, which is customer success. And so I also had to be able to have those conversations. And to be honest, those conversations happened before I started working there, before I signed. I had to believe that this was worth my investment of moving back across the country to Boston, which I was not planning on doing. And so I had to believe that the investment was real, because there's plenty of times where that would be, something that is what the words are, but not the reality. So I took a lot of time to work with the different executives to figure that out before I signed. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of overlap too with Cantina, with this stakeholder management, because I was hired explicitly to help build this practice from scratch, essentially. Cantina was very committed to the idea, and that was terrific. From the very top, Matt, our CEO, was convinced that service design was one of the right things that Cantina ought to do, that it's what the market needed and it's what we could offer. It was a way to increase the kind of value and enhance the kind of work that we could offer clients. So that being said, I think there was some definitional work, both from horizontally to peers, as well as to the leadership of the company. A lot of the questions that I think I was asking myself were, in order for Cantina to credibly deliver service design to the market, there were some big questions about Cantina's position in the market. How were we understood? How did we talk about ourselves? How did we think about ourselves internally? And then, of course, there's the maturation of the practice itself. What's the methodology? What's the approach? It manifested itself in a lot of different ways. It was finding partners in crime and getting people excited, who were co-advocates and people who made us collectively smarter about how we were going to do this. It was doing things like lectures and training sessions and workshops. I think, frankly, it clicked. I'm going to look at Krista here and ask her if she thinks this is true. I think it clicked when we started to make, when we started to do, when things were tangible. And I think if there's any lesson, and this is a lesson that I think runs through a lot of service design practices, is how fast can you get to performing and practicing this idea so that it starts to become tangible. So I think moving beyond let's talk abstractly about service design and maybe definitionally about what it is and in the right context, what's the go-to-market strategy kind of thing, and more, let's actually make this. Let's go out and do research. Let's turn this into a journey. And then, of course, when you start to get client work and you can show it off and bring people into that process, that's when people who work at agencies find that it's real and they get it. Oh, it's work. It influenced people's lives. It changed an organization. It looks and feels like this. So that's the process. But I would say going forward, it's a lot of systems like working groups and lunch and learns and sharing work and bringing people into that kind of work. It's the usual suspects, but it's really making it tangible and real for your colleagues.
Yeah, can I build on that? So I love what you just said, because actually as part of our UX strategy for this calendar year, we have 3 pillars, and the second one is show, don't tell. And that's because I think it's really easy for UX practitioners. I'm going to talk about UX practitioners specifically here. I don't know enough yet about how service designer practitioners do this, but I feel like UX has been really known for being like, process, yeah, look at my process. You know, look at my 5 steps. It's like, great, now you all follow that, and we'll all be good, and we'll have great results, you know? And it's like, oh, shit, like, shut up. Sorry. Yeah, like, you know, it becomes this problem because now you've got this process in your face, and it's like, well, what are the results? What is the impact you're going to have on my business and the bottom line, or what we're trying to attain for this calendar year? And it's like, you know what? Sometimes, like, I've been slow, like just being as quiet as possible, minus these parts where I had to make these, like, I had to, you know, and again, like, I'm like quietly doing these things, and then suddenly, because the idea is like, hey, you know what? Let's show them what the impact is. Let's show them what this can actually do. And so as quietly as I could, I was asking for 6-figure budgets because I don't want to be banging the drum too hard until I can really say, like, ta-da, you know, like, because they're part of it, actually. There's not a ta-da. But, you know, we're really excited about what we're going to be doing together as a team to really be, like, slowly unveiling the opportunity that this is going to bring for our company. So I typically like to be even more show, don't tell than I had to be in this particular case. Mm-hmm.
And I will just add, Sean, that was the correct answer, so you get 10 points. So this next question was Toby, and it's a very difficult one, so blame him. When we're talking about scaling products versus services, this is an area where there are different implications and different impacts if we're thinking about those things. And I know for Susan, Molly, again, you're still at the very early stages, so you haven't yet scaled. But I know we've talked about, Molly, we talked quite a bit about how this will scale, not just within the aviation team, but within Blue Cross in general. So when and how should service organizations codify practice into process in the interest of greater consistency, particularly talking about the human interactions? So this question for everybody, anyone can jump in, but you could talk about plans to do this or practice in doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, our organization is a very process-oriented organization, so process tends to resonate.
Sorry, that wasn't for your organization, that was my comment. Sorry, I'll take those back.
No.
Sorry.
We're trying to break that mold and use the show, don't tell as one of our key mantras as well. So, so I think being able to show that there is process behind it is an important tactic for us to gain buy-in, for us to have convinced our senior leadership team that service design is worth the investment, even at the onset. I think we are still very early stage, but I think being able to speak to the plan and speak to how you are thinking about scaling and how you are thinking about measuring results. Our company is also very traditional metrics heavy, and myself being in an innovation role, sometimes that can be difficult, but you have to be able to show that you're thinking about the path forward, even if you're not there yet, I think, if you're going to go anywhere. So.
Sure, okay, I have to think about this. So when I think about codifying, I guess what really we're gonna try to codify here, and what, again, at MindBody, I think we really focused on was not any particular artifact or deliverable, right? But how do we make sure that we're taking that outside-in approach to what we're doing? So I don't know if that, I don't know if it's like, the word codify is kind of throwing me here, but how do we always not, always take some of that lens? How do we make sure that we're always inclusive of what the customer, and understanding what the customer is, the pain points or the challenges they're having, or what's really, really awesome moments that matter, right? So that we're starting there, and then we're pulling that in to see what we can do internally to be able to, to meet those needs and to help create those better experiences. So whatever that is, to keep us always thinking customer first, that's what I'd like to codify.
There's an interesting tension in this question, which is businesses want things to be understandable and measurable and repeatable, because they need to scale, they need to have a margin. Even if you're a public charity, you've got to be thinking that way. And this kind of work is performative and improvised. However well you may set it up, in the moment, it's not a product. It's not a widget. And that's really hard. And I think your comment about KPIs is really important, because if you're not looking ahead to this kind of different way of thinking about it and planning for it to transition into the day-to-day of the business is going to just eat it up, and it's going to put its own metrics on it, its own way of managing it, and it's going to lose the magic of what you're trying to deliver, which is that stuff that happens in between, that stuff that happens in the moment. It's tricky, but I think the KPI thing was really important, because that sort of indicates like you're doing experience KPIs along with business KPIs and trying to bring those both to bear and keep them alive.
Yeah, we were just talking about that today, even at two different levels. One actually with an internal person who's Six Sigma, right, business processes in our customer success organization and all about operations. And he and I were having this conversation about, what are the KPIs that you're looking at and to improve, this one particular area of our onboarding process. And he brought up two things, and I was like, okay, and I can't remember what they were either way, I probably shouldn't share them. But I was like, okay, that's great. That's awesome that we're going to be working towards that. We could be driving down or expanding how many people, this coverage is, whatever, these numbers. I said, but then we could just be shifting the cost. So we thought about what is there to balance, right? The shifting of the cost, because and I've seen that. We experienced that in my body again. It was like, oh, if you do, hey, time to go live, and you're saying hey, it doesn't matter, onboarding team, let's reduce the amount of time it just goes to go live for a customer. Guess what happened? It shifted the cost. It shifted the attrition for us down the line, right? So it's like what is the other metric that's going to help us balance that out? So it is making sure we still, again, have that customer lens that isn't going to hurt us also as a business somewhere else. We're not just shifting those costs. Yeah.
So I want to, somebody, yes.
I've got a question. So this is really interesting, but can you guys provide some context? So I'm really enjoying the discussion, but so for instance, Molly, is a consumer of healthcare, what is it that you're providing? So if we're trying to scale something, what is, as a consumer, am I?
That's a good question, and it's brand new for us, so we're going to learn as well. But we're about to launch a brand new space that is a public-facing space, and we are not selling insurance in this space. We are not selling anything in this space. The whole point is to bring consumers into our process so that we can learn and we can be better partners in designing a better consumer experience and better products to serve our customers down the road. And this is brand new for our organization. I mean, even bringing customers into our offices and having them participate in conversation is new for us. So putting ourselves out there and doing this in a very public manner was just groundbreaking. And I think we're a company that at our core, we manage risk, right? That's what health insurance is. We manage risk for a living. So this inherently felt pretty risky to a lot of our senior executives. But I think because we brought in experts in service design, that was a way for us to actually de-risk the situation, and through prototyping and testing, we were able to show what experiences could be and get people a lot more comfortable in a very real and tangible way. I don't know if that helps.
Well, that actually leads into what we want to talk about next, which is more around kind of best practices and challenges in designing these services. So starting with Susan and Sean, when we're talking about things from a research and design perspective, what are some best practices or methods that you've used for research and design of services that are a little bit different, or you found to be really successful, that are something that you had to kind of shift when you were doing prototyping and design or research for a digital touch point, per se?
I think that dovetails really nicely with what you were talking about before, because the way I think about that question is we always like to make the boundary between the agency and the client as porous or non-existent as possible, because when you do this kind of work, where does it reside? Does it reside in a journey map? Does it reside in some PowerPoint or report? And the answer is that it resides in the people who deliver the service. And so you can't hand that off. So I think a lot of the research methodologies that we like to use are to make a joint team, first off, all on the same page, get out into the field together and see an experience together. One of the really cool things about the Blue Cross project was that at some point I realized that people were playing my part for me. Like, I didn't need to speak anymore because somebody was like, oh, do you remember that time we did the service safari and we saw this? And it's just like this other thing. And that's when I realized we were successful. Like, doing together, I think is the real key. So I pull from that perspective and I say, all right, well, what's the doing together activities? You know, maybe it's a workshop, but if we can get out into the field and see and experience, and if possible, get really close to the customer as well, and make them part of the process, that's I think, the secret.
Yeah, I 100% agree, which is why I actually don't think that that's different than product design. Like, your Scrum team, your engineers, your product managers, your QA, whomever else you're working with, they also could really benefit from being out in the field, because if they can internalize and empathize with that end user, then they will find more creative ways to solve those problems, right? Because they understand the problem in the first place. And so, yeah, I feel like 100%, and I would say that's no different than product design.
Kind of going on with that, so oftentimes when you are prototyping a service, you're dealing with different scale. And, you know, we played around with this in the Blue Cross, but can you talk a little bit about how you play around with scale, how you play around with models, and kind of the role playing within those?
I can talk a little bit about what we just did. So building this new space, we had, of course, worked with architects to design floor plans and that sort of thing. And we had thought about the kinds of things we wanted to put in the space, but it wasn't until the service design engagement that we actually, with Sean and Krista and team, and Alice, I don't know where she is right now, but there she is, built us a foam core model that was probably about this big, but we were able to take it apart, put it together, and kind of put little people and props inside it to show what would that experience actually look like and bring it to life in a little bit more of a real way. And then beyond that, back in Cantina's old offices, we took a room that was the size of the new space that we're creating and literally put up all the walls and the barriers to those walls and anticipated furniture in the space and role played it that way. And we ended up making some decisions, which were hard decisions at the time because we were overturning some prior decisions around architecture and color choice and things that, brand even, that we had spent months developing. But it was such an important lesson for us that, you really have to prototype some of these things to impact consumer experience and design an experience that is going to resonate with people. So those were two examples from our work.
That was great. I'm tempted to talk a little out of school, but we brought the CSO and CMO in, and it was awesome because they were like, is it really this size? And I was like, didn't you approve the architectural drawings?
Is it really this color? Yeah. Is the entry really this large?
That was awesome.
Yeah, so I don't know if this fits or not doesn't fit, I'm not sure. But at MindBody, we introduced a pretty large program, in terms of teaching the organization, we identified basically, really followed the Intuit model and identified a number of people across the entire organization to train them on design thinking and design thinking practices. So not only we were working with them cross-functionally to identify ways to improve kind of these touch points, and we were dropping the baton, and we knew that in certain cases. So we were working with them on initiatives that cut across the customer journey, but we're also trying to train them and give them the tools to be able to do that on an everyday basis when we weren't working on them, a particular initiative, so that they were kind of thinking about things a little differently and not, as you guys know, not driving to the first solution, which is pretty typical and common. And so just that divergent thinking process and having them kind of take a step back and say like, wait, we need some more ideas. It's not this first idea. That was playing the long game of scale, right? That was really intended to help individuals within different teams of different levels be able to, teach their other team members and bring in that other thinking when we couldn't be there. So we were scaling beyond what our team was going to be capable of, being able to influence. And that was pretty successful, I would say. We went through 2 rounds of it, 2 different groups. So we had 60-something catalysts, CX catalysts. And then they took those also as they continued to move from mind body and move on. I have like a little tear in my eye because people would say how much that helped them with their new roles and their new jobs. So I'm like gonna cry right now. So that to me is partly scale. And honestly, we do have plans for something similar, but we won't do that. We won't even try to tackle that until 2020. So.
Build on that just for a moment. I think there's something interesting in what both of you were both saying around the levels of people that you bring into that prototyping experience, and everyone from the most junior person on your team to the most senior person in your organization. I think service design almost levels the playing field a little bit and allows people to feel comfortable contributing to the conversation, and that's the best way that you can get diversity of perspective is by creating an environment that enables that, and I saw that firsthand in our work.
It reminds me of the very first project I did where I created a journey map for a company that was trying to use robotics to deliver medications. This was before PillPack. PillPack was much better. When PillPack came out, I was like, oh, that's what we were trying to do. But before that, what was awesome about it was it was kind of the first time where I rolled out this journey map to the CEO, and I realized we were standing on the same side of the table pointing together about what we wanted to change. And that has stuck with me. I always try to create experiences when working with clients where we're looking together at something that we co-own, whether it's co-design, whether it's a workshop process. That seems so essential to the act of kind of positive creation. Because too often you get into these kind of things where it's like, what are you giving me? What's the process? What's the defensive process I'm now going to engage in and cover my butt about keeping my promises? When a lot of this work is gnarly stuff. Like you need to get in there and together be brave about exploring this thing, because you didn't want to go there because it goes against the norms of business, but it's huge opportunity. And so finding approaches where you feel good and trusted, I'm so glad you said that. That's really nice.
Yeah, and it also, there's less opportunity for them to be like, backpedal, right? Because they were there, everybody else was there. We're all saying the same thing, that kind of
One
thing
of the
too.
things we like to do too is these kinds of things are intangible to organizations, and so we're not the first. This is pretty common, but a lot of times you wind up producing a video that tells the story that can go out to the organization, and that's one of the things we did. And part of it is exactly what you just said, which is we're standing behind it. We're making a public display that this is the thing that we are bringing into the world. It looks like this, and we believe in it, and we're not going to backpedal. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that video, so I'm like, okay, great idea. Because either way, it's about the visibility, right? And so, whether it's visible artifacts or whatever, but I love the video because then it gets, you can keep sharing it and keep sharing it, and that would be great, so.
So We've been talking about all the happy feelings and the successes, but we're going to flip that now. So what have been some of the biggest challenges or roadblocks to success when it comes to service design engagements and ultimately implementation of services?
Fine. I'll take this one first. You guys are well, I would say previously, sometimes there's, it's the politics. I had kind of hinted at the CX strategy label not being something I wanted to continue later. So that was a learn lesson for me, because at some point that came too close to another team and how they thought where they were headed. And so that kind of, it got weird. So I was like, okay, you know what, service design, that sounds great. And so even as I mentioned when I was interviewing and I'm talking to our head of customer success and we were talking about these things, she was straight up like, yeah, I'm hiring director of customer experience and, love to know how they would work with you. I'm like, that's awesome, because I'm thinking about, the opportunity of hiring service designers. And we were able to just have this conversation, and knowing that there was like an overlap, but that there wasn't as much territorial conversation. It was more like, this is great. And in fact, there was one point where she said, well, she asked me the question, and this is what I love about our executives at Toast, is that they're so humble across the board. It was kind of like, do you think that still makes sense if you're hiring a service designer? And she said that openly, not defensive whatsoever. And I was like, yeah, I actually think that totally makes sense, because there's going to be so much work that you need to do within your organization that we're not going to have as much insight, or we're not going to be in all of those things. There's just so much work we need to do together as an organization either way. So, and we talked through that a little bit more, and it was like, okay, this is great. So to be able to start on that kind of footing made me feel really comfortable for the follow-up conversations that happen. So, yeah.
Other challenges?
I think two things I'll highlight on our end. One, we talked a bit about the importance of leadership buy-in and having champions of your work. And I think for us, right at the onset of our service design project, we experienced a leadership transition. And that's not uncommon, but it was a whole new process of onboarding someone, getting them bought in, and having to do that in a really quick time frame, because we only had X many months until we were planning to launch. And so that was one hurdle for us. I think the other one we haven't faced yet, but I am anticipating it could be a challenge. And I say this coming from a place of, my team teaches human-centered design thinking, and oftentimes we have people go through our workshops and they feel like they've kind of checked a box, right? They've done their design thinking, they can put that on their performance plan for the year and call it a day. And I worry a little bit that there is some of that same mentality with service design. Okay, you've designed this, you've put the money into it, you've put thought into it, great, we're done. And it is going to be an iterative process. We are going to learn so much the first day that we open doors. And I think, I'm not sure that the understanding of that is universal across the board. So I think that might be a hurdle for us.
That one's a huge one, which is the idea that it's never done. Yeah, and that's tough. I would say the question was biggest challenges?
Challenges and roadblocks to implementation or just the engagement in general.
Well, look, if you think about the kind of work that you're doing, the promise is that it's outside in, cross silo, end to end, and top to bottom. Each one of those things is hard. So outside in, first off, is do we actually have the research and insights to know what that is, or are we guessing? And you bump up in that all the time with organizations. I think the end-to-end thing, the cross-silo, it sounds great, but silos have domains and there are politics involved. And so the processes by which you build trust and bring people together are really, really important. And then, of course, the top-to-bottom thing, if you get into process reengineering and you're having conversations with people about, well, are you a cost center? That's not how you say it, but it's like, what are the costs? What are really the processes going on here? Process reengineering is scary. You have to draw down your bank of trust at that point, because you're hopefully having hard conversations about what's really going on and what really needs to change. And to do that, you kind of have to have gotten on the same page about that it's all in service to this kind of end-to-end view that's going to be good for the organization as a whole. So I would say that it kind of spans the gamut from those three plus. How do you transition from the change mode, where people kind of are excited? They bracket off, their daily life. I'm always very sensitive to the idea that whenever you come in through design-led change, people have jobs and kids and cats they want to go, or jobs, homes and cats and kids they want to go home to. And here you are all excited about new things and difference and what's gonna, and it's like, I just want to know what I need to do, get my paycheck, and go home. So sustaining this space where people are incentivized and feel ownership of a little bit of perpetual beta is a really hard piece, I think.
And by the way, I also had those challenges of new people coming in. I kind of forgot about that. I put that aside. So I had the budget, and then I actually had to do another level of selling because we had new people on this steering committee for these company-wide initiatives. And those people were finance. One was a finance person, so I was like, oh man, and I knew nothing about him, didn't know he was on the steering committee, didn't build any relationship with him, and I was like, oh my God. Because as I'm like, okay, I'm presenting, we're gonna do this engagement, this is great, and then it was like, I was like, oh my God. So that took a few, that actually slowed us down by, I wanna say 4 or 6 weeks, actually. Which actually worked out really well because you can't imagine how many people we hired in 4 to 6 weeks that were pretty imperative for that will be imperative for the success of this initiative. So it's this weird thing that happened that is serendipitous for us, so that when we go into the real cross-functional workshops in a couple weeks, we'll have, I think, pretty decent amount of the players, some more up to speed, so really being able to provide input. We'll bring in some people that have been around for some time, and again, different levels and what have you, but that's a challenge to have new people come in, and then how do you influence yet another person, especially one with a very, who is, that's like the money game, somebody who has a lot of influence, right, into that decision making. And that actually took a lot of the support of my other executives. Even to the point where I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, how am I gonna send this out? And getting some guidance from our president, what's the best way to handle this one situation kind of thing. And I know they were having side conversations in order to push this through. So again, going back to that champions thing, but yeah, that can happen.
So one of the challenges I've come across is that many of the things that we design in service design are intangible. And sometimes when you're dealing with people who are not as imaginative or very used to getting a concrete deliverable, it's hard to demonstrate the value. So how have you dealt with that?
I'll tell you how. I've lied. No.
Share your secrets.
I'm like, there are lots of levers to pull at any given time. Pull the ones that you think are going to be the most impactful. So actually, I was just talking about this a little bit at the MyTex event because we had somebody from an agency talking about how you shouldn't sell artifacts. And I was like, well, sometimes you want to sell artifacts. Again, that was a lever. I was selling artifacts because that's tangible, and it feels like, oh, I'm going to get something at the end of this. Knowing that it's really what we're really trying to do is break down the silos and get to a shared vision and understanding of where we should be headed and how to head there. And then again, X amount of KPIs, not every individual team's KPIs, right? We're starting there in 2 weeks. But knowing all those things, you can't tell people we're really going to be doing this so that you guys all play better in the sandbox together. Who wants to hear that? I don't think so. So it's artifacts. Oh my God, these artifacts are going to be so amazing for the company. We're all going to see where we're headed. And those things are true as well. But it's really about the things, the being able to work through the process in the first place more so than the artifact at the end. The other piece is because we are growing so fast and bringing on so many new people, that artifact now becomes, oh, wow, this one snapshot in time that we all agreed to, now we can bring everybody else on and just saying, you know what, we're not going to have 12 different meetings and whatever, just show them that artifact. So there was also other reasons why our executive teams were like really excited about that piece because of where we are currently. So again, leveraging the context and what you understand, and I don't know, lying, I don't know. Yeah. It's not lying, by the way. I'm obviously exaggerating.
I think for us it comes back to the show don't tell concept again, where if you can make it real for people and have them experience something, then they inherently get it a little bit more. So I think that was huge for senior leader buy-in on our project. The other thing that the Cantina team did for some of our more literal thinkers and where we couldn't bring everyone into the experience was they actually, do you all know the company Innovation Leader? Scott Kirshner. It's a group that highlights innovation across industries, and they do a lot of online blogging and writing. And Scott Kirshner is a very well-known personality in the innovation field. The Cantina team ghost wrote 2 articles by Scott Kirshner. If we were to look forward in the future, and Scott Kirshner is writing an article about our new space, what would that look like? And they did one that painted a very negative, kind of dire picture, and one that was, really our North Star and what we wanted to be working towards. And we socialized that with our entire senior leadership team, and that got them really bought into the process, and it made things a little bit more concrete for them, even without seeing a tangible deliverable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was going to comment on that one too. That one worked out extremely well. And I would say that those 2 articles, we had done a ton of work and research together. And we had a number of different insights or inflection points that we needed to reach consensus on. And that was a really rich sauce that was boiled down into a 1.5-page article. So it was all these implications around what the research, what the consumer research was telling us, the implications for brand and space, how we told the story to the market. The kind of arc of it was that you want people to get your story and make it their own. And when you're engaging the public, that's risky, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find a common ground. And so when we wrote those articles, it was tough. Because I think I read everything Scott Kirshner wrote, and it was like a million drafts to get the voice. Now that I've got it, by the way, I can imitate him on anything. Like, I know the formula. But my colleague George and I wrote the two articles, and it was really a distillation. It was a story, but there were all these turning points about little decisions we were making that in the aggregate were going to take us over here where we didn't want to go. So it wasn't just a negative view for negative view's sake. It was that if we put our pieces on the board here, they're going to take us collectively over here. And you could see that unfold in a credible way in the story. But if we make some changes here, which are hard changes, staffing changes, brand identity and storytelling changes, changes to the space, if we make those changes here, these subtle but significant altercations take us way over here, which is where we want to land. And I loved what the CMO said, which was, these are powerful. There's one of them I don't want. And that was the key.
And I think Sean is now pimping himself out as a ghostwriter for hire. Is that what I'm hearing?
I understand the Globe pays so well that I want to do that. So.
Exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about Handoff, and I think that since Cantina and Blue Cross just went through this, so Molly and Sean, from each of your perspectives, from the consultancy and from the client, what factors needed to be in place to really make the handoff successful?
I think for us it was a team that was going to own the work moving forward, and being able to, which we're still doing, but onboard people through the entire process. So some of our team was part of the entire consumer journey, Cantina journey, and some of our team is new and is going to be responsible for some of the outputs of what we created together. But having that connectivity and having people on my team, not just myself, be able to take ownership for that onboarding because they'd been part of the process and bought into the process has been, I think, hugely helpful.
And I would say that's very true too. And if anything, that's always a challenge because you have turnover. And that's really kind of hard to plan for. You have time to hire, which doesn't always line up with your desired timeline. But yeah, I think we worked very deliberately to try to erase the boundary so that there wasn't the feeling of a handoff.
Yeah.
That there was a sort of just a natural transition. You can always do more.
Yeah.
But that, we tried real hard. I think we did a pretty good job. And I think that's the key is don't do a handoff, right? Maybe that's the answer.
I love that. I love that. I think with any kind of agency, I actually just wrote an RFP for a completely different engagement, and I literally put in there, no shock and awe, no black box, we just cannot have that. Like it's just can't be part of what we're looking for. And I would say that that's true, of our service design engagement as well. And that was part of those conversations as well. I didn't know Cantina did service design. Ugh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We can talk later.
I know, sorry.
Yeah. I love the no shock and awe black box because one of the things that's really changed is that the role of the designer is different. We are facilitators. We're co-creators. And we erase the boundary where we can with our client. We try to bring the people who will use the service into the process of creating it and validating it and testing it. So that's how we mitigate risk. Is we're not the people in the white coats who know it all, who go back to our back cave and come up with the thing with the big reveal. It's not brand design from 10 years ago.
So we've talked a lot about the importance of having advocates, of getting buy-in higher up, of making sure there's alignment, bringing everybody in to kind of do this together so that we're not working in a black box. What other lessons have you learned or words of wisdom do you have for people who are trying to start this or kind of in the midst of service design?
So, the thing that I'm really focused on these days is the question of how design-led change transitions into businesses and organizations. The language is different, the mindset is different. As I said before, like people want to go and do their jobs, get measured for it, and go home, right? How do you build an approach that sustains itself? And I think we've touched on that theme a lot. That's the one that, I think about it as like, how do you go from the innovation of the possible to the prototype of what can and should be to the governance and optimization of it and then back again? Because if you end with the optimization of it, you're going to fall into that like loop, which is a potential trap, because you always have to go out and get the raw material so that design can adapt and evolve and change and that people can learn from their innovation, improvisations that arise and feed those back in. So feedback loops and the role of business versus the role of change, that's a big one for me.
I think for me, it's just a continuous lesson in humility. Service design, it's like, and I've been trained again in human-centered design and lean and all of these things, and you still get wrapped up in your day-to-day in the business and you think you know the answer, and it's just such a good reminder that you need to have that consumer at the forefront and be designing for the person that you're trying to create an experience for. So,
Susan, do you have anything you want to add?
Anything to add? Wow, I feel like I talked too much already. No, I mean, I would totally agree with that. It's easy to get caught up in your day-to-day, like you said, and then you're just, I don't feel now like I get to see our customers enough. I mean, and going out to dinner, yes, that's different a little bit. But like really get to, be in the context of the business and really sit there. And so that's like something I know every time I need to go back and do that to remind myself of why we're here. Because, you know, like you're just juggling all the other things and there's so much new stuff coming at you. You're trying to figure out, the, you know, how to manage that day or the next day. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's true of for any kind of design.
Do we have any questions from our audience? Yes.
Thanks. It was touched on about the intangible nature of service design. I'm just curious to hear from each of the panel, what for you guys when you're communicating it is like the gold star, a gold star example, case study, or even personal experience when you're literally having a conversation with even a family member as to like what this is about.
Yeah, Disney, right? Like Disney does it so well, like ridiculous well. And in fact, I just learned something new about Disney this week, and I was like, wow, God, they even do that? Did you know about their trash cans, how they manage trash? Yeah, you gotta go look online. It's ridiculous. They have designed their trash cans to never be full. So meaning like nobody has to go and get the trash out, because God forbid you, standing in front of Pirates of the Caribbean, see trash when it's getting moved into some cart being delivered somewhere. They're on chutes. They're below the ground in chutes, like across this entire underground system that goes flying to some place, and never is that trash can full. Like, so like, talk about like down to every single moment, and like, it's like incredible when you think about that level of design and intentionality. I was like, God, they're even better than I thought, man. Like crazy. So yeah, so I'm gonna stick with that one for a while. Yeah.
I like to use Disney too. It's, you know, waiting in line is designed. Walking from ride to ride is designed. Going to the bathroom is designed. Like everything is thought about.
I'd echo that too. I think, you know, and this is a phrase that I'm stealing from Krista, though I don't think you've trademarked it. But it's not just the stuff that you know of as moments, as the ride, right? But it's everything that happens in between. So it's the in-between that gets designed along with the stuff that we think of as the tangibles that collectively is the scope of our work. You know, so whether the metaphor is Disney or the metaphor is like the coffee shop you like to go to where it just feels right, that's design. I don't know that it's a gold star. I feel like, you know, you explain these things to family members and they go, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Agreed.
Other questions? No other questions?
One of my colleagues from the way back days used to say, you can't design an experience. It's impossible to design an experience. And we got into some arguments about this because I was a designer and she was a user researcher. Her name was Liz Sanders. She wrote a lot on the subject in the old days. What do you say to your ability as designers to actually affect experience?
As a non-designer, I'll answer that. I hope that an intentionally designed experience is always going to be better than something you don't plan for at all, leaving it up to the whim of what will happen. So I'll let you know in a couple weeks when we open.
I have like two thoughts on that one. Liz Sanders is great, first off. But I kind of agree. You can't actually design the experience because the experience happens in the head and heart and memory of the person who receives it. So we do it indirectly. We design for experience. We try to set up the conditions where it occurs. But to echo what Molly just said, I'm reminded of a debate that we used to have in graduate school way back when, which I can't believe we had. But and that's the idea that the design for experience will happen whether you intend it or not. You know, you can't be neutral on a moving train. The train's going to move. Someone's going to decide and feel and think a thing about you, whether you make it intentional or whether you just let it happen. And so to the extent that we can be Disney and think through all the details so that we hope that the person's reaction and feeling is what it's going to be. I have to say that you bring up the Disney example around here, and I don't know what it says about Cantina culture, but people are like, well, I didn't really have a very good experience at Disney, and let me tell you why. It can happen. Who knows? But they've done pretty much everything they can, right? So
I'm glad that Sean went before me because I was going to say something different, but now I'm like, oh no, I'm going to say what he said because that's actually right about the designing for experiences. You're right, because you're not really, the experience itself is in the eye of the beholder, who comes with a lot of their own prior experiences, right? And a lot of things that you can't control how they're going to react. So that is totally true. But I wasn't going to say that. Just full transparency, humility. No, thank you for that. It is that thing, and that's what I was saying about the intentionality of that design of the trash, right? Because it was intentional. Everything else is, if you don't design for it, then it's non-intentional, but it's still something. It's still something you could experience. So, I'm just going to echo everything Sean said.
All right, I've got a question for you. So when we talk about you in the challenges area, you were talking a little bit about timing. And one of the questions I have is how do you deal with the fact that service design can happen at various phases in the lifetime of a service, right? It can happen beforehand. The service doesn't exist in the case of Molly's stuff, and we're creating it. Sometimes it's already existing, like in the case of Toast, right? How do you deal with the fact that there's a lot of variability in when service design might enter the life cycle of a service?
it's an interesting question.
I know, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, but even before. So I'm trying to figure out how, so I'm thinking, there is so much variation regardless. So if there's one service, it's not actually one service. It's actually like, it's not one journey anyways, right, through that service. It's like so many possibilities. And actually, that's one of our challenges right now, is figuring out like, what versions of those are we gonna hyper-focus on, right? Is that getting to, so it's like, okay, so, well, not enterprise, let's just set aside enterprise because that's its own beast, right? So we have to break down like our prioritization of how we might approach the journey to be able to create the intentional service design that we're looking to do from an end-to-end perspective. It's like kind of broken up right now with a lot of handoffs. So I look at this like in my head, it's like a bunch of different things. And in fact, I was talking about a Sankey chart today. Do you guys know what a Sankey chart is? I didn't either at one point, so I'm not trying to be fancy. But a Sankey chart is this way that data visualization, and we had this guy on our analytics team previously, and I loved it because it shows the flow of information and how it branches and where it comes from, and size and color can determine the strength, how much the volume or whatever, like how many percent the bigger percentage is and that sort of thing. And I just like kind of see this, and that's what it is. It's so complex. And you're thinking like, out of all these different like layers, which ones are the most meaningful, or at least which ones are we just going to start with, in a small way to do run some lean tests, for instance. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but there's like it's complex, that alone, trying to figure out where to focus.
How do you spell
Sankey?
Almost like the coffee.
There's something like that.
No, I don't
what
know.
is the
Sanka.
Sanka, yeah.
That's a different chart.
I'm like, that's old school.
It is, yeah, I'm kind of old. So that's an interesting question, and what springs to mind is that one of the challenges with service design is it's holistic, it's end-to-end, right? So what are the boundaries of what you're trying to do? And I think you can approach this question. As an agency, as a consultant, it's the appetite and timeline of the organization. Sometimes you need to show a quick win to build credibility. Sometimes you have an organization with huge ambitions, and there just has to be time. And you have to get the raw material to get some solid ground on which to make decisions. And then you can draw your boundaries about what you're gonna chew off. I think two things relevant to a project I'm working on now is the idea of incremental, adjacent, and transformative innovation is one, which bleeds into, we're using the 3 horizons model with a service design project we're doing for another client, because they're trying to change the engine while flying the plane. They've got a business and numbers to meet, but they're also trying to figure out how to look ahead and implement change. And so we pretty much agreed that we're doing a discovery where we may find some things that are going to take some time to do, and they want to know that. But what we really want to do is really want to kind of find one first or maybe a little bit of second horizon kind of problems where we can dive deep through like service blueprinting and process reengineering to see actionable results soon that move the needle on some of the business metrics, while at the same time it kind of lays the groundwork for that's good. Like we've made some progress, we've advanced the cause, we've connected it to the business, but ultimately you don't want to leave those transformative opportunities on the table, so you identify them and then you try to negotiate when you can do them. But that's one technique we're using.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a better answer to this. I think we did start our service design journey before we launched, but I still feel like we were 6 months too late to even starting. So I think, you can never start soon enough, and yet it's never too late at the same time, because it is an iterative process and we'll be continuing. Yeah. So.
Any final questions? All right. Any final thoughts from our panelists? If there's one takeaway from today, anything you want to throw out there?
About finding partners and champions, and the fact that this is a people-to-people question.
It is.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting to hear very different. I mean, you're so deep in the service design world. We're totally different industries, and yet there's so much applicability across the board.
Yeah, no, I think I just like this whole conversation was great. There's some, in a lot of conversations you have, there's some validation of what you're already thinking. And then there's the, I should think about that differently. And then, there's like, noted, I could be doing this too. So there were a couple of those takeaways that I have as well, so that's super awesome, right? Mm-hmm.
And this is the technique from the end of every ethnographic interview is, in so many words, what did we miss, Krista?
You all got A's. You did fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I want to thank our panelists, so a round of applause for them, for their time today. We still have plenty of food and beverages, so we welcome you all to